So this video lesson is all about bar and line graphs, and more specifically about creating bar and line graphs. We'll talk about some more things involved with graphing, such as interpreting bar and line graphs, comparing bar and line graphs, things like that when we get to your next class. But for this video lesson is all about creating bar and line graphs. So first, before we even get to bar and line graphs, I just want you to think, if we had this table of these 5 countries, China, France, Italy, Spain, and the US, and a number of visitors that they get every year, 37 million to China, 77 million to France, etc. You can read it. We would be interested in how can we represent this data visually? Some way that everybody could understand, even this very confused looking tourist off to the right. So go ahead, pause the video, either sketch out something visually that you think could represent the visitors to each of these countries per year, but just generally take a little bit of time and think about how could we visually represent this data. Well, if you think back to all the things you've learned in math class specifically, but in school generally in the year, let's make him a little bit smaller so we have some space. If we think about all the ways that you've looked at visual data over the year, there's a few different ways. We could create something you might remember like a pictograph where every person represents, let's say, 10 million people, in which case we can have some people here, awkward partial person off on the end because it's not quite to 40 million, etc. We could represent it that way, and as long as we know that one little person represents 10 million people, then we can use that to compare each of these different countries together. Italy, for example, has 4 full people. France, on the other hand, if we were to look at it, would have not only 4, but would have, let's make this easier, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and another awkward part of a person for 77 million, etc. This could be a very easy way to visually represent it, but it could also be a very tiring way if we were looking at drawing lots and lots of little pictures. Another way that you might have thought of, or you might have tried with the idea of the video lesson, is to create a bar graph. So let's actually use what we remember, or even if you don't know, don't remember much about a bar graph, we can still come up with this idea to create a bar graph out of these particular data points. Now, the important part about bar graphs is that they have 2 axes. An axis is just one of these lines. One is vertical, usually representing some amount of some number that we are measuring in, and the horizontal axis usually represents all of those different things that that are being measured by these numbers. So on our one axis where we have visitors, we need to make it in millions because it's not 10 visitors, 20 visitors, it's 40 million, 52 million. So we're going to create a nice easy scale, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. And we'll mark this, and we don't have to write down 40 million, 30 million, 60 million because we know that our visitors are in millions. And finally, just create a list of our destination countries at the bottom. We'll have China in blue. We'll have France in green. We'll have Italy in red. We will have Spain in purple. And we will have the US in yellow. And so now we need to look back at this data table and say how many visitors did go to China on average per year. And it says there are 37 million. So if we look immediately above where we have China, we can see that 37 is somewhere around there. And so based on that height, we're going to create a vertical bar and fill it in. And the bar will go up to the point where the number of visitors per year for China. So the bar will go up to 37 million. Or in this case, just looks like 37, but because our visitors are in millions, it represents 37 million. Now, France to 77 million. Again, right above France, we'll go up to that point, which is about 77 million. Create the vertical bar from France that represents 77 million. And so on with Italy at 40 million, Spain at 52 million, and the US at 42 million. Or generally, if we're going to make this a little bit cleaner looking, it'll look something like this. So I want you to go ahead and write down this part up here that's between the stars and is in a bit of a red box. There's a definition of a bar graph. A bar graph is a graph that represents data with vertical or horizontal bars, and that's the primary thing about a bar graph. As we mentioned before, the bar graph has two axes. Plural of axis is axes. One in this, the vertical one in this case, representing the number of tourists and millions of visitors per year. The other representing the countries that we're talking about. And so, of course, like good graphs, it also has a title so that we know what it's talking about. So we can see China's bar goes about as far up as 37 million you would expect it to go, halfway between 30 and 45. France is all the way up to 77, 40, 52, and 42. So that is a bar graph. Now you can use horizontal or vertical bars. All of the ones that we're going to use today for as an example are going to be vertical bars. And we just take the destination countries in this case and create bars to show how many visitors go to those on average per year. So taking that idea and using that last one as a model, let's see what you can do with creating a bar graph that shows the number of museum visitors in a certain museum every day. So the graph from last time is over here on the left as an example, and see what you can do with using that as the basis for creating the next one. Pause the video and we will come back to it. So now, instead of destination country on the bottom, we're going to use the days: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, R for Thursday, so I don't have a T twice. Those are the days. And then instead of visitors in millions of visitors for our number units, we're going to use the number of visitors, just the plain old number of visitors to a certain museum in a specific day. And now we need to figure out how big do our numbers need to be on our number of visitors. Now we need to go all the way up so that it represents 133. So if we make something up here around 140, which is above 133, I'm going to choose to count by 20s. 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 120. And so this doesn't need to be in millions and thousands or anything like that because it just is the number of visitors. Now for Monday, the visitors were 115, which is just below the 120 mark. For Tuesday, our visitors were 113, which is more or less the exact same size, just a little bit smaller as the Monday graph. Wednesday is 133, which is way up here, at least compared to the other two. Thursday we had 56, which will be closer to this area down here, significantly smaller than the rest. And Friday is 84. So we're going to come up to there. It's not quite, should be more or less around here. Let's make that bar a little bit more accurate. And there we have it. That's the bar graph for the museum visitors per day. Has the days on the bottom, has the number of visitors on the left, and the bars show how many visitors there were per day. Now I want you to think, what if we wanted to represent two different things? In this case, we want to represent not only the number of visitors there per day, but also the number of visitors who are children. So we still have the days on the bottom: Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And we'll still have more or less the same units on the right-hand side: 20, 40, 60, 80, 100, 120, 140. But now we want to represent both of these sets of data on one graph. And we can do this using a bar graph, but now we have not just visitors, but we have visitors who are children. So we need a way of representing both sets of data at one time. Now we had before, and I'm going to make this purple, make our visitors bar purple. Before, we had talked about how we could use bars to represent the number of visitors that were at the museum on any given day. This was 56, and this one was 84. So we have something that looks like this. These were our visitors per day. And I made them all in the same color so we can remember that these are our visitors per day. Color them in. And that's only part of what we want to know. We want to know the number of visitors who are children too. And if we were going to create a bar graph just of the visitors who are children, we would create one that looks like 75 for Monday, one that had 62 for Tuesday, one that has 92 for Wednesday, one that has 30 for Thursday, and one that has 42 for Friday. So we would have our bars and they would look like that. And it turns out that this is a pretty effective way of getting across both sets of data at the same time. One bar in one color for visitors, in purple in this case, and one color in red, which is visitors who are children. And we can compare the number of visitors to the number of visitors who are children very easily just by looking at it. This is something we call a double bar graph. And if we wanted to, we could create a triple bar graph, a quadruple bar graph, etc. Eventually, it just gets very, very crowded and difficult to talk about. But the key thing about a double bar graph is we have to have what's called a legend that tells us what bar color or what bar style means what. In this case, our legend is our color coding on the table. But if we didn't have the table here, we would have to mark that regular visitors are purple and children visitors are red. Now, apart from a bar graph, we can also talk about what's called a line graph. And so go ahead and pause the video and write the definition of a line graph up in the top between the stars. The line graph represents data over time by connecting data points with line segments. And so the key point of that, once you've paused and come back, the key point of that is it's often data over time. It's tracking trends over some amount of time. So this table shows the number of subscribers to cell phones in millions from 1998 to 2003. And because we're tracking over time from 98, 99, 2000, 2001, 2002, 2003, it makes sense for us to use a line graph because then we can see the trend of subscribers in a line. So a few important things about a line graph. We're going to plot a point every once in a while and then connect those points with line segments, which I've colored over in blue. And the points that we're going to be connecting either need to be evenly spaced, both horizontally and vertically. In this case, each year is evenly spaced, or they need to be in a proportion, which is something we'll see tomorrow in class. So here we have subscribers on a nice even scale. Here we have years on a nice even scale, and so we create a line graph like that. So go ahead and pause the video now again and create the line graph that you would make from this data, the number of people in line at a fast food restaurant. You have our times here. Notice that our times are already spaced out evenly for us in 2-hour increments, and these are the number of people in line at the fast food restaurant over the course of the day. So pause the video, create the line graph, don't forget your labels and your title, and then come right back and we'll look at it. Move that graph up a little bit. All right, so on the horizontal axis is what we're trying to track. It's often time. So this is the time of the day. And we have 8 a.m., 10 a.m., noon, 12 p.m., 2 p.m., 4 p.m., and 6 p.m. And we want them evenly spaced. Because after all, those times are evenly spaced throughout the day. On our vertical axis, we want to have the number of people who are in the restaurant. Now, the total number of people at most that we have is 18, and the least that we have is 4. So I'm going to count by 2s, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, have 18 be right up there. And now the next thing we need to do is plot those points. At 8 o'clock, there were 11 people in line. At 10 o'clock, there were 4 people. At noon, there were 18. At 2, there were 6. At 4, there were 9. And at 6, there were 12. And so now we want to create, as straight as possible, some lines between these to connect them. And I have the advantage here of being able to connect actual lines. But as long as your lines are pretty much straight, your line graph should be all right. And so this is the line graph that we will create. Our title, of course, being number of people in line at a fast food restaurant. So as we can see, this tracks the number of people over time, over amounts of time in a day, and we can very easily see where there are the most people and where there are the least people. And so the last question I'm going to have you answer for this video lesson is, looking at these scores, these 3 test scores that we saw in class when we talked about mean, median, mode, and range, I want you to create either a bar or a line graph for the data of one particular student, either student 1, student 2, or student 3. Now you're going to explain why you chose to graph the type that you did. So why did you choose a bar graph, or why did you choose a line graph? And then bring it to class for the next time that you have class, and we will share those and go over them and compare how bars and line graphs represent each of these data points.